Hi, this is Sarah Mikesell with the Poultry site, and today we're here with Dr. Kalen Cookson. He is the Director of Clinical Research with Zoetis. Thanks for being with us today, Kalen.
Glad to be here.
Great, very good. And today, Kalen and I are at IPPE 2025 in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're kind of tucked away in the Zoetis booth here. So, and today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the studies that you presented at IPSF this year that looked at the impact of a late IBD challenge on immune suppression. And that topic probably sounds familiar to myself and to our readers because you had a similar topic that we chatted about during IPPE last year.
Yes, last year the study was a little bit different. It was our first look at immune suppression from an IBDV challenge, and it was a 3-week variant AL2 challenge in broilers. And the test for immune suppression was looking at bronchitis, infectious bronchitis protection from a pretty standard day of age spray program, Mass plus Georgia 08. So we challenged it 3 weeks of age with the IBD AL2, and then we came back 4 days later with a DMV 1639 bronchitis challenge. And then 6 days later we measured protection. So to frame that, 10 days after the IBD challenge, we were measuring for the bronchitis protection. And what we saw is the AL2 challenge did in fact reduce the immunity that the birds had from the Mass Georgia 08 day of age vaccination. It reduced it from like 90 to 95% to about 55%. So it was significant.
Yeah.
And the kicker to that is we also had a treatment group in there that received our recombinant HVT IBD vaccine in ovo. And when they received the 21-day challenge with IBDV, there was no loss of IBV immunity at 31 days. So they were 90% protected. So basically, we demonstrated that the 3-week IBD challenge caused a depression of immunity to bronchitis, and that protecting against the IBD challenge with the vaccination it prevented that immune suppression from occurring. So not just IBD and bursal protection, but protection from the immune suppressive effects.
Very good. And let's talk now about the new IBD research that you conducted and have just recently presented.
So that study, a good study should probably bring you some surprises and also some unanswered questions, which we had. So one of those, and I think we mentioned in the interview, was, well, what if we did a 4-week challenge?
Right.
Would we see the same type of effect, a ding to the immune system? And so we devised a round 2 study, this time in leghorns, SPF leghorns. And we vaccinated them with our recombinant vaccine again at day of age to see what effect it would have. And this time we challenged in 3 different windows. We looked at 11-day challenge, so inside of 2 weeks where we know there's going to be significant and permanent immune suppression. And then we looked at 3 weeks like the last time, and we looked at 4 weeks with the AL2 challenge. And then to measure immune response, what we did this time is we administered and inactivated our killed SENDIB Bactrin at 4 weeks of age.
Right.
And then we waited 4 weeks for the birds to seroconvert to that vaccine and measured burses and serology.
Very good.
So
Anything further on that?
yeah, so like the previous study, we did see that there was an immunosuppressive effect.
Yeah.
We looked at Newcastle serology and we looked at Salmonella serology to the response to the kill vaccine. And what we found was the Newcastle serology was impaired by the 11-day challenge, as we would expect.
Right.
but the 21-day was not, but then the 28-day was. So the 28-day challenge caused a significant reduction in Newcastle titer response. Conversely, the vaccinated birds, there was no depression of the Newcastle response. So where we did measure immune suppression, it was restored by protecting against the AL2 challenge by the vaccine. On the Salmonella side, it was what I would have expected. The 11-day challenge caused the most suppression of Salmonella titers, followed by the 21-day challenge. Was still significant, but not as a great a reduction in the titers. And the 4-week challenge was noticeably lower. It was like 50% reduction, but it wasn't significant. So if we had larger bird numbers, it probably would have been. So it kind of it demonstrated, greatest immune suppression inside of 2 weeks, still getting immune suppression from a 3-week, and even seeing some at 4 weeks. And obviously with the Newcastle response, we saw a significant impact. And in all of those cases, the recombinant vaccination not only gave 90+% protection against all the challenges, but it also absorbed any hits to the immune system. So birds responded normally, just like the non-challenge controls.
How did those findings measure up to what you expected?
Well, I guess the Salmonella serology kind of fell in what I was kind of expecting. Like the 3-week late challenge was not going to be as great as the 11-day, but still significant. But the 28-day wouldn't be quite as much of an effect as the 3-week. But what was kind of unexpected was the Newcastle is like the 3-week challenge. Their seroconversion was fine. It was the 4-week. So it made me think that maybe, we've always said with late infections, timing is everything. So when is that temporary window of immune suppression and what is happening in that time? And maybe with bacterial challenges, it has more of a linear response curve. The further you get out with your IBD challenge, the safer you're going to be from those mitigating, problems. But maybe with viruses, maybe it's more about timing. Like if that 21-day challenge, and we're asking the birds to respond to that antigen a week later, and they're really going to optimally respond probably 10 to 14 days after. So maybe that temporary immune suppression that was created at 3 weeks, they got past that window when they still had time to respond to the Newcastle antigen.
Right.
And maybe the bronchitis antigens, maybe they're a little bit more, bacteria are more complicated antigenically, so maybe it's more challenging if a bird is immune suppressed. If there's a temporary immune suppression, maybe it lasts longer, to get an optimal response to the bacteria.
Right.
So
some questions answered and some questions raised, right?
Always more questions.
Right.
So it keeps us in business, I guess. Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we missed or anything else that you wanted to add, Kalen?
Yeah, sure. One other thing that was really interesting. So most IBD vaccination challenge studies, you don't carry out the study much beyond about 7 to 10 days after the IBD challenge, because you're looking, what was the bursal protection? But because we waited for seroconversion, it gave us an opportunity to follow that bursal atrophy from the challenge and whether there was bursal recovery and the challenge controls versus the vaccinates. I mentioned the vaccinates had 90+% protection, so you can't do much better than that. But what was really interesting is the 11-day challenge. At 8 weeks of age, when we terminated the study, there was still significant bursal atrophy. So an early challenge that bursa is just not recovering even 6-7 weeks later. And even the 21-day challenge, we saw very little evidence of the bursa bouncing back. And one last thing with the recombinants, just like we know with other recombinants, they don't completely prevent infections. They're just best at limiting the amount of infection and the tissue damage that results. But they don't prevent infections, but they definitely reduce the infectious load. So the vaccinated birds, they got infected with IBD. We saw that with PCR samples that we took over time courses, but they cleared the virus out much faster than birds that weren't vaccinated. So that immune response is all still very positive, and it probably means less shedding back into the environment of the IBDV. So another positive.
Very good. Well, great. Thanks so much for all the information today, Kalen.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Sarah Mikesell with the Poultry site.